Warning, this podcast contains violence, sexuality, gore, and other horrible and disturbing things. Listener discretion is advised. Also, the hosts of this venture are ignorant dipshits, so please do not take anything they say as fact. And enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
It is our basic human right to be fuck up.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Occultae Veritatis.
Hello, and welcome to Occultae Veritatis podcast. I'm Gallifrey, and we are doing a top 10 list of nuclear weapons. Co-presenting this subject with me, I have...
I'm Misfit.
And our guest this episode...
I'm Brannigan.
I'm Isis.
Alrighty, let's launch right in. We're going to talk about the top 10 most devastating explosive weapons, which all happen to be nuclear, that humanity has ever detonated.
10 years ago, when this atom bomb was exploded, man had just found the key to nature's mightiest secret. In those 10 years, all the world's great powers have developed nuclear science, both for peace and for war, racing against time and each other, not knowing yet which way their frightening knowledge will ultimately be used. The dangerous business of atomic research is ringed with safety precautions. The special glove boxes are used for handling radioactive materials, while other workers have to be dressed up like spacemen to maintain and replace components which later will be fitted in the boxes themselves. And here is the reactor itself, fueled by natural uranium, whose power is brought under control by graphite moderators. The 26-foot cube contains 40 tons of uranium fuel in rod form. But from Bikini Atoll on the other side of the world comes the reminder that the atom holds a threat as well as a promise. Target rings mark the spot where a hydrogen bomb is to be dropped. To test the effect of the deadliest nuclear weapon yet, boxes will snap open 15 seconds before the explosion, containing samples of wood, paper, cloth, grass, and tree branches. Radar sets prepare to follow the bomber, which will be controlled from the carrier Estes. The skiffs are launched at predetermined spots, bearing instruments which will measure radioactive fallout. As HR nears, the bomber crew receive their final briefing, for the timing must be perfect. The pilot's skill matched with the split-second planning of hundreds of technicians on the ground. Automatic cameras are ready for the B-52 Strato Fortress, with the hydrogen bomb tucked in its belly, is airborne and approaching the target area. Bomb gone. And at once the supersonic giant bangs sharply to race for safety. It'll be 15 miles away when the bomb explodes at 10,000 feet.
I think you were going to talk about the honorable mention bombs. The other nuclear bombs that are kind of interesting before we get to the top 10 most powerful.
So, everyone's heard of the suitcase nuke or backpack nukes. Those are tactical nuclear weapons that are portable enough to be carried by 1 to 2 people, so they could be snuck in and planted ahead of time and then detonated, leaving enough time for whoever planted it as like a form of insane sabotage to just get out of there.
Like, it's called a briefcase, that's the correct name, but it's more like a crab trap, like a lobster trap that weighs 100 pounds. It's about that size. If you've ever watched The Deadliest Catch and shit like that.
The smallest nuclear bomb, the W-54, was actually a little over 150 pounds for just the warhead itself.
It would take one big fucking dude to carry that a few hundred meters in enemy territory. That might do some damage.
Uh-huh. Now, neither the United States or the former Soviet Union ever made public the existence of weapons small enough to fit into like an average-sized suitcase.
A lot of people know that there's about 10 nuclear weapons, perhaps more, that have been lost through the years. But when you talk about these suitcase nukes, or like they're not confirmed to exist, but apparently Russia said in a 1997 interview with 60 Minutes that they have lost about 100 of these suitcase-sized nuclear bombs over the years.
And that's one thing where things can get kind of terrifying. Around the time following 9/11, one of the biggest fears was a terrorist group getting a hold of any of this nuclear material and using it either as the nuclear bomb or using it as a dirty bomb. This would be one of those definitions of where it's a nuclear weapon, but it's not a nuclear bomb. In the case of a dirty bomb, the fact that it could be a nuclear bomb is kind of irrelevant. The main point is to spread the radioactive material. So any kind of explosive would do, just to spread that radioactive dust within a specific area, just to cause terror, destabilize the area.
While the possibility of a nuclear missile being launched is still slim, a new, much greater threat has just emerged. During the Cold War, Russia manufactured over 100 nuclear warheads housed in briefcases. Today, over half of them are missing. The suitcase bomb. Easy to move, easy to operate, but hard to identify. They can be detonated anywhere. On the outside, it looks like an ordinary attaché case. Inside, it contains a timer wired up to a miniature nuclear warhead. The warhead consists of a plutonium core surrounded by explosives, which produce an extreme increase in pressure, precipitating a nuclear explosion. The blast would flatten almost all buildings within a 500-meter radius of Piccadilly, immediately killing up to 20,000 people. There would be further destruction and approximately 50% fatalities up to at least a kilometer radius. Within hours, the prevailing wind would carry the nuclear fallout as far as the M25. The whole of London would have to be evacuated. Congressman Kurt Weldon is heading a public inquiry into the danger posed by the suitcase bomb.
You'd have a massive loss of life, you'd have massive radioactive contamination, and you'd have massive havoc, unlike any that we've prepared for in the past. I would argue that the potential for a small atomic detonating device is even greater than the possibility of an accidental launch of a long-range ICBM.
One of the earlier ones, the W-48, does fit the criteria of small, easily disguised, and relatively portable, but its explosive yield was fairly small for even a nuclear weapon. One of the possible applications, atomic landmines.
Jesus fucking Christ.
So long before the fears of suitcase nukes, the U.S. designed and built small bombs to hide behind enemy lines. Weighing a little over 400 pounds, the medium atomic demolition munition wasn't exactly portable. However, the special atomic demolition munition, some of the warheads, the XM-129 and XM-159 atomic charges, and the B-54 bomb were man-portable nuclear weapons used by the U.S. military from 1960s to 1980s, but they never actually got used in combat. Now, one of the interesting tactical nuclear weapons that did get deployed, but also never really used in combat, was the Davy Crockett, which, if you've ever played Metal Gear Solid 3, Snake Eater, this one actually features somewhat in the storyline. It is a essentially small artillery piece like a mortar that just happens to have a nuclear warhead attached to it.
If you've played the Fallout games, it's like the Fat Man, except everything's about double the size. So instead of like the Fat Man nuke being like 1.5 feet tall, it's like 3 feet tall. And instead of the launcher being 3 foot long, it's like a 6 foot long launcher as tall as the guy launching it.
The maximum effective range of the Davy Crockett was about 1.5 miles, anything within a quarter-mile radius of the explosion would receive a fatal dose of radiation. Anything within 500 feet would be completely incinerated. It had a yield of 20 tons of TNT. The weapon technically worked, but not without a ton of problems. The first flaw was aiming it. The launcher tube itself was flimsy compared to the immense weight of the munitions, around 100 pounds.
So if you're picturing this thing, the nuke is sitting right on the front of it. So imagine you're trying to sling this thing over your shoulder, or you're trying to get it on a tripod on the ground, but like 90% of the weight is right at the front end. It's like trying to fish, but you have like a fat child hanging off the tip of your fishing rod.
Yeah.
It sounds a little unwieldy.
So it blows everything away within 500 feet, but it can't really shoot all that much farther than that, so it's a little risky to the wielder.
Because of the weight, it was prone to toppling over at any moment, and it also had a very unreliable aiming system in that because it's so heavy, it couldn't be really locked into place too well, so getting it accurate to where you want it to detonate is pretty much impossible. It didn't have any way of canceling it once the weapon was armed and fired. It would have to go off. And to make it worse, the half-mile kill radius was only counted for instantaneous death by radiation. So if you were downwind of this thing, the entire crew that's firing off this thing could be exposed to lethal radiation from the fallouts.
Man, if I was on that crew and it fucking toppled over, my balls would suck up into my torso and they would never come down again. Like, Jesus, holy shit.
The objective of this operation is to demonstrate tactically the infantry and armor's current organic low-yield nuclear delivery system, the Davy Crockett. The tactical situation has been pre-designed to illustrate the employment of Davy Crockett in support of an attack. The battalion has been ordered to secure objectives 1 and 2. The significance of this operation was recognized throughout our military establishment. Key representatives from all the services and other interested agencies were invited to observe this historic event, a critical first for the Army. The President was represented by close personal advisors. The countdown for the firing of the nuclear round was under control of the Defense Atomic Support Agency. At H-5 minutes, all troops were ordered to take cover in previously prepared trenches. At H-3 minutes, all observers put on high-density goggles or turned their backs to the direction of the burst to avoid retinal burns. At H-2 minutes, green star clusters were fired as the final warning before the detonation. The round was launched at H-17 seconds to accomplish H-hour impact on the desired ground zero at a range of 2,852 meters. The round was set for a low height of burst. It detonated perfectly, releasing its lethal radiation. Like any other nuclear weapon, the Davy Crockett gives off 3 basic effects: heat, blast, and nuclear radiation. By far, the most significant effect is its deadly initial nuclear radiation.
The best part is like all the different ways they had for deploying nuclear munitions. In some of the tests, including Upshot Knothole, they deployed nukes from a large cannon.
There's going to be a picture attached to the show notes of this thing, or just check our social media. I'm going to put pictures all over the goddamn place for this episode, but this is literally like an artillery piece that can launch a multi-kiloton nuke, and which is sort of scary. Like, artillery pieces are big, but they're not impossible to set up in warfare. Like, theoretically, this thing could be rolled out and used against the enemy lines, any other artillery piece. Like, it's kind of fucking frightening.
The date was May 1953. Just outside the town of Las Vegas, at Nellis Air Force Base, a series of events took place. Events not included in routine airfield operations. The 280-millimeter guns were taken off their railroad flat cars and started on the 65-mile journey to the Atomic Energy Commission's Nevada Proving Ground, where they would provide the proof of their atomic might. In 1951, the gun was tested as a normal artillery piece. All that remained was to check out its other capability, the atomic shell. Unlike field operations of World War II, these guns need no extensive ground preparations. For the total time to prepare for firing, just 20 minutes. The time for rehearsals and final checkouts is over now as 0 hour approaches. The big gun is ready to prove its atomic punch with the firing of the Mark 9 shell as one phase of Operation Upshot Knothole in the Nevada desert. Everything functions with a precision found in any capable, well-trained team. 0 hour is minutes away now. With everything set now, the gun crew moves back to take positions in slip trenches during firing. The time is 0830. The date, 25 May, 1953.
4, 3, 2, 1.
With a degree of accuracy 4 times greater than any gun developed before World War II, the 280-millimeter gun has proven its worth. Capable of delivering the atomic shell some 13 miles under any weather condition, day or night, the big gun provides more accurate and damaging support to ground troops than any other gun in the recorded history of warfare.
Something else that I wanted to mention, by the way, the nuclear suitcase. I'd love a president that carried around a suitcase nuke with him.
It would depend on the president. Like, Trump, no. Obama, also no. Roosevelt can have one. The first Roosevelt, Teddy.
You know what? I sign off on sending Biden into the heart of Russia with a suitcase nuke.
I also vote for this.
He's only allowed to detonate if he's within 10 feet of Putin, though.
Yeah, go real dark, Brandon.
Way cooler than what it was. I would have mad respect for the president if they were just rolling around with a suitcase nuke ready to go just in case. But in reality, it's more of a collection of codes and instructions that if the president needed to launch the nuke, they could use the contents of the nuclear suitcase to launch the nuke from anywhere on Earth. So I think it has equipment to make the call through radio lines or phone lines or whatever to any of the nuclear silo sites and have it launch.
These modern bombs, though, the what did you say, 500 kilotons?
Yep.
How many of those would it take for, to annihilate the human race off of the planet?
Not many. I was gonna mention at the end of the episode, but on the planet we have around 10 billion tons of TNT worth of nukes, and all these nukes, most of them are affixed to warheads and transportation rockets that can bring them to any point on Earth at supersonic speeds. I don't think all the human population would be eliminated because I don't think we have enough firepower to scorch every last human settlement. But I think that we definitely have enough nukes to wipe 80% of the human population off the map to eliminate every major city.
Wow.
If we fired all of them off, I don't think we'd have any major cities left.
That's another thing, too, is a couple of the proposed designs for some of the nuclear warheads also included other materials inside of them. Adding cobalt into the shell surrounding the nuclear warhead itself, as well as possibly gold or other materials to essentially increase the fallout yield of the weapon. So essentially turning it into a nuclear dirty bomb to make it even more dangerous than before in terms of just radiation.
Yeah, and there's theoretical bombs that are even way bigger than the number one on the list I'm going to mention today. Even the Tsar Bomba, that bomb itself, they could have added another material to the heart of that bomb that would have doubled its yield, doubled it. So it's sitting at 50, you'll see here later, it's sitting at 50 megatons. It would have went to 100 megatons with one addition. There's technologies today that theoretically could push that limit to 150, 200, sometimes even 300 megatons, which is 300 million tons of TNT. Like it's hard to grasp numbers like that. Like I have trouble like if I picture like my car full of 1 ton of TNT, that's enough to blow everything away including the axles, let alone 100 million tons. Like I can't even conceive of it.
One thing interesting that we have now that we can go into is the most powerful non-nuclear bomb, and that's referred to as the MOAB, the mother of all bombs. The acronym actually stands for Massive Ordnance Air Blast.
That's much less cool.
It's a large yield bomb first tested in 2003, and at the time of development, it was the most powerful non-nuclear weapon in the American arsenal. It was designed to be delivered by a C-130 Hercules because it's so massive. It had a blast yield of 11 tons of TNT, so about half the yield of a Davy Crockett.
Like, man, the scale and power that jumps up from non-nuclear to nuclear is insane. That E equals MC squared is fucking killer.
Mm-hmm. The MOAB itself was actually deployed in combat 13th of April 2017 in an airstrike against an Islamic State Khorasan province tunnel complex in the Achin district in Afghanistan. So as part of the formerly ongoing Forever War. So this would be well into Trump's tenure as president.
Yeah, I remember him bragging about it on Twitter.
Uh-huh.
March 11th, 2003, marked a milestone in military history. At Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, the United States tested a new superweapon. MOAB, short for Massive Ordnance Airburst, quickly became known as the mother of all bombs. This massive weapon creates a blast radius stretching a mile in each direction.
The MOAB is made out of an aluminum skin, a very thin aluminum skin. And the reason we did it that way was in order to maximize the blast effect. We did not want the airframe of the bomb to interfere with the development of a blast wave that has the impact to the target.
The world's largest non-nuclear weapon, MOAB is over 30 feet long and weighs more than 21,000 pounds. It's no easy task to accurately maneuver such a behemoth through the skies toward its target. Engineers overcame the challenge with a grid fin design that provides great aerodynamic lift.
The largest guided bomb in the history of the world, with the tremendous impact and detonation of this explosive, really just shook the area. And the shockwave could be heard for miles and miles.
Let's get into the top 10 most powerful nuclear detonations humanity has ever successfully done. So just for some context, the first nuke that I used for my example where I blew up my own city was 20 kilotons, 200,000 tons of TNT. The one at number 10 on the list is over 50 times bigger than that, and its name was Ivy Mike.
And what about Mike? Let us now go back and examine the evidence and point up the statistical highlights of that device. Remember those final last seconds?
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, T0.
This is the largest fireball ever produced. At its maximum, it measures about 3 1/4 miles in diameter. Compared to the skyline of New York, this means that with the Empire State Building as 0 point, the Mike fireball would extend downtown to Washington Square and uptown to Central Park. In other words, the fireball alone would engulf about 1/4 of the island of Manhattan. The tremendous upsurge of air from the detonation rapidly pushes up the Mike cloud. Again, nothing of this height and width has ever before been witnessed. If the picture is stopped at this point in the cloud's growth, the height of the cloud is approximately 40,000 feet. This means that 32 Empire State Buildings at 1,250 feet per building could be piled one on top the other before they would attain the cloud's height at this time, roughly 2 minutes after zero. Some 10 minutes later, the cloud approaches its maximum. At this time, the mushroom portion of the cloud has pushed up to around 10 miles and spreads out along the base of the stratosphere to a width of about 100 miles, while the stem itself is pushed upward deep into the stratosphere to a height of about 25 miles. Later figures put the Mike yield at around 10 megatons, or 10,000 kilotons. This means there was more energy released in this one shot, roughly 10 times more than in all previous atomic blasts combined, including probably those of Russian origin. Or to put it another way, 4 times more power in this one shot than from all the high explosives dropped by the entire Anglo-American Air Force on Germany and the occupied countries during the last war.
It was 10.4 megatons, which equals out to 10 million tons of TNT. It was the first H-bomb. Ivy Mike was the first full-scale test of a thermonuclear device. So this is a nuclear bomb that fused atoms together instead of splitting them apart. So it used fission instead of fusion. And it detonated in 2 stages. There was a 2-ton steel thermos with super-chilled deuterium and various other fuels inside of it, kind of like a Russian nesting doll of nuclear materials. And above that steel thermos of super-cooled nuclear materials, it had a plutonium detonator. It wasn't typically a bomb, like a loose object that you could load on a plane or fire from an artillery piece. It actually sort of looked like a small-town radio station. It was sort of a building that was built to be a bomb to explode. Grew up in a small town with a little, 2-story radio station, and that almost looks exactly like my small-town radio station, except it had a 10 million TNT ton yield.
That's typically more than radio stations have.
Typically.
One hopes.
Yeah. That's a lot of power for a small-town radio station.
So this trigger of plutonium that was above that thermos was surrounded by 92 high explosive triggers. So this bomb detonated by all those high explosives surrounding the material detonating. In fractions of a second, the energy from those detonating would melt the plutonium into a liquid mass that went subcritical almost instantly and exploded. When it exploded, it was able to explode the secondary explosive, which was that thermos filled with a nesting doll of radioactive materials. And that exploded. It resulted in a fireball that was 3.5 miles big. That would be enough to swallow my whole city and reduce it to atoms. It's enough to give everyone within a 30-kilometer radius third-degree burns, and it would irradiate 10,000 square kilometers with a lethal amount of radiation. And that's just number 10.
The scene is Eniwetok Atoll, a remote chain of coral islands about to take the shattering impact of the colossal detonation.
In less than a minute, you will see the most powerful explosion ever witnessed by human eyes. The blast will come out of the horizon just about there. And this is the significance of the moment. This is the first full-scale test of a hydrogen device. If the reaction goes, we're in the thermonuclear era. 3, 2, 1.
The shockwaves of the world's first H-bomb rush towards the onlookers and spellbound, they watched something never seen before. Fantastic in its form and in its power, a frantic addition to the arsenal of arms. The violence of the bomb is comparable with the energy released by the sun itself. Later, a helicopter flew over, and the pilot found that the island had completely disappeared. Nothing there but water and a deep crater. The former island is outlined in this diagram. The crater, which it had now become, could contain, say, St. Paul's Cathedral a score of times. Other islands of the atoll were stripped and scorched, everything on them withered or melted by the blast.
For number 9, we come up to Castle Romeo in 1954. Operation Castle was organized into 7 separate experiments. All but one were to take place at the Bikini Atoll, the location of much of America's nuclear weapons testing outside of the continent.
And the birth of SpongeBob SquarePants, the fun, irradiated sea sponge, I think? That's how evolution works, right? You blast sea creatures until they speak English? I think so.
Absolutely.
The only explanation.
It was the first test of the TX-17 thermonuclear weapon with the wonderful code name, Runt. It was the first deployed thermonuclear bomb, detonated on March 26, 1954, at Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. It was detonated on a barge in the middle of the crater from the Castle Bravo test. It was the first such barge test, a necessity that came about because of the multiple detonations of powerful nuclear devices had obliterated the small islands following the detonation.
They were placing these bombs on islands that were barely sandbars. And then when this bomb exploded, literally it would spread all the material that made that island an island all over the place, and there would be no surface above the water to place a bomb anymore.
Although it had been predicted to produce a yield of 4 megatons with a range of 1.5 to 7, before the results of the Bravo test caused an upgrade in the estimates, it was originally estimated to only produce a 3 to 5 megatons. It actually produced a yield of 11 megatons, the third largest test ever conducted by the U.S.
The reason it's so variable is because despite the large amount of energy that's released from these bombs, oftentimes a low amount of the actual material actually fully explodes. Take the Hiroshima bomb, for example. It was made of about 64 kilograms of uranium. When it exploded through fission, less than 1 kilogram of that 64 underwent fission, meaning its atoms split apart and released a little bit of energy. So a tiny little bit of those atoms, when they split, turned into pure energy. They lost a little bit of mass. So how much of their mass was converted to energy to make up the energy of the explosion? 0.5 gram. 0.5 gram. That's all it took to create the amount of destruction. Destroying a city, wiping it off the map, creating a fireball miles wide. That's all it took, about the weight of a butterfly. Crazy what nuclear weapons can do. Frightening. And that's why it's so hard to know how big an explosion can be. That's why you have scientists in these programs having a betting pool on how big and how small it'll be. They don't really know. Little imperfections in the bomb, uneven temperature or pressure can cause uneven fission, and a lot of different factors can cause a little bit more than 0.5 gram, for example, or a little bit less than 0.5 gram, for example, to turn into pure energy. So they don't really know until the bomb explodes just how big it might be. They know a range, but they don't know where within that range it might fall because it had so many little factors affecting it.
What happens to whatever isn't consumed by the explosion?
It is turned into dust and spread amongst thousands of square kilometers. That's actually what creates a lot of the radiation is
Makes
the
sense.
stuff that doesn't explode, turning into dust and being evenly spread like your grandmother's ashes all over a large area of land.
And yeah, that's it for number 9.
Starting at H-minus 48 hours, all personnel at Bikini Atoll were evacuated from the scattered islands and moved aboard task force ships. The only men to remain were the members of the firing party, protected in their bunker on NU Island. This photograph was taken from an airplane at 50 miles. The width of the fireball at this time, about 3 seconds after detonation, was 4 miles. The top of the fireball at this time, 40 seconds after detonation, was 5 miles above sea level.
The tremendous yield resulted in a serious fallout situation at Bikini and certain other atolls downwind from ground zero. After the natives were evacuated, radiation survey teams were flown back to the exposed atolls, where studies were made and water and soil samples taken. Rongelap had a native population of 82. Evacuation was carried out on the second morning after the shot. Rongerik had no native population, but was occupied by 28 men of the task force. 8 men were evacuated by air at H plus 28 hours, and the remaining men soon after. Uterik had 150 natives, and they were also evacuated, although radiation levels here were relatively light. The removal of personnel from the contaminated atolls was done mainly by destroyers. These destroyers were attached to the task force primarily for security purposes, but were easily adapted for use as evacuation vessels. All of those exposed were taken to Kwajalein, where complete physical examinations were carried out. Every effort was made to assure their comfort and well-being.
Number 8, Soviet Test 1, 2, 3. A lot of my list gets mysterious and redacted. The Soviet Union was a very private and protective nation. It believed at its very heart that knowledge is power, and it protected its secrets very closely. So, sitting at number 8, we have Soviet Nuclear Test 1, 2, 3. We don't know much besides the estimated size of the explosion. It was one of 57 tests conducted by the Soviet Union in 1961. It was detonated near the Arctic Circle, and it caused third-degree burns to any unfortunate Arctic animals within 35 kilometers. No footage or recording has ever been found of this detonation, and there are many examples of the local indigenous population of the area being driven out immediately by Russian forces, forcing them to evacuate, or they just weren't warned and were irradiated to death in the follow to the explosions. And as global warming increases, the meltwater from all these explosives in the Arctic Circle that have been trapped in glaciers are being released. The water melts, and fresh glacier water, fresh meltwater from these glaciers comes out highly irradiated for anybody that drinks it.
I didn't even think about that.
Oh, yeah. And that is it for number 8.
President Truman's dramatic announcement that Russia has created an atomic explosion sends reporters racing for Flushing Meadow, where Russia's Vyshinsky arrives to address the United Nations.
Mr. Vyshinsky, have you got any statement about President Truman's statement on the atomic bomb? Please, excuse me. Does Russia have the atomic bomb? Well, what's your reply to me?
The Russian foreign minister maintains his silence about Russia's atomic progress in his address. He accuses the West of planning atomic war and urges the outlawing of atomic weapons. But he makes no reference to Russian agreement on international inspection, keystone to control. Secretary of State Acheson says of America's stand,
in connection with the President's statement that there has been an atomic explosion in the Soviet Union, I wish to emphasize that from the very beginning of the development of atomic energy, this nation has been determined to do everything in its power to proceed toward a truly effective international system of control. it would be deluding ourselves to get something on paper that was not really effective. The President's statement underlines the importance of having an effective method of control.
If the announcement made by President Truman that the Soviet Union now has the atomic bomb is true, then item number 23 in the agenda of the present session of the Assembly will project itself as one of the most important questions that we will take up. The impasse that now exists regarding the international control of atomic energy must be broken, and the Assembly must face this question squarely for the sake of mankind and for the peace of the world.
Meanwhile, every American atom plant redoubles security precautions. At Hanford, Washington, regulations become even more stringent than in wartime, as drivers' credentials are checked and counter-checked. Even planes are used by the patrols to block very effectively the progress of any suspicious vehicle.
Number 7 and 6, they are also part of the Castle series. Number 7, Castle Yankee, also in 1954. It was originally intended as a test of the TX-16 Jughead bomb, but the design had become obsolete after the Castle Bravo test was successful. The device was replaced with the TX-24 Runt 2 warhead, which was detonated on May 5th, 1954 at the Bikini Atoll. It released energy equivalent to 13.5 megatons of TNT, the second largest yield in a U.S. fusion weapon test. And moving on swiftly to number 6, Castle Bravo, also in 1954. Castle Bravo was the first test in the Operation Castle series, also conducted at Bikini Atoll, detonated on March 1st, 1954. The device with also interesting code name, Shrimp. A lot of these code names that some of these warheads have are just wonderful.
Oh yeah, biggest bomb in history, codenamed Ivan. We're gonna get to that.
Is there any rhyme or reason to the names, or is it just like random words?
I'm not sure. I think it is mostly just random words.
I think some military brass captains and officers got a kick out of giving funny names to secret projects, because there's a lot of funny names throughout American military history, right down to the names that are secret nuclear projects.
Yeah, because like Operation Paperclip was so named because they would put a paperclip onto the files of the people that they wanted for the program, but like, you know, MK Ultra, not obvious what it is by the name, and you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm sure some of them were like dedications to major people who put work into the projects, and some of them may have been maybe like memorial names, like who knows. And some of them may legitimately be just some brass pulling a name out of their ass, or maybe some names were voted on or pulled out of a hat, but there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to the naming conventions.
Well, isn't one of the reasons to kind of hide what it is?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, and there's probably not aliens being dissected at Area 51, but there's probably experimental aircraft and weapons being tested at Area 51, but they keep it nice and vague with just Area 51. I think it's sort of that same effort, except instead of areas having even numbers, like all the different secret areas that the military controls, there doesn't seem to be any like common convention. Like some of these bombs were named after people, some were named after animals, some after events. Some seems like, oh, I'm just going to name it after my cousin's favorite animal kind of thing.
Shrimp was the most powerful nuclear device detonated by the United States and the first lithium deuteride-fueled thermonuclear weapon. Castle Bravo's yield was 15 megatons of TNT.
Jesus Christ.
2.5 times the predicted 6 megatons of TNT due to unforeseen additional reactions involving the lithium-7, which led to the unexpected radioactive contamination of areas to the east of Bikini Atoll. At the time, it was the most powerful artificial explosion in history, but there's actually a lot more interesting about specifically Castle Bravo. The fallout from the explosion was the heaviest in the form of actually pulverized surface coral from the detonation. It fell on residents of the Rongelap and Udarik atolls, while the more particulate gases of the fallout spread across the world. The inhabitants of the island were not evacuated until 3 days later and suffered severe radiation sickness.
And they had opportunities to evacuate them. They had opportunities to reschedule. They had opportunities to warn them right before and right after. They did not.
In addition to that, further away from the test, 23 crew members of the Japanese fishing vessel Daigyo Fukuryu Maru, the Lucky Dragon number 5, were also contaminated by the heavy fallout, experiencing radiation poisoning. The blast incited a strong international reaction over atmospheric thermonuclear testing. The fallout spread traces of nuclear material as far as Australia, India, and Japan, and even across parts of the United States and Europe. Even though it was organized as a secret test, Castle Bravo quickly became an international incident, prompting calls for a ban on the atmospheric testing of thermonuclear devices.
I think so. Castle Bravo was detonated in 1954. By that point, I think the Japanese had had enough. Despite your opinion on whether or not we should have dropped that bomb, I think they had enough.
I'm just kind of amused by the concept of like trying to secretly detonate nuclear bombs, because they're not subtle. The ocean's so hard to control. I mean, like, you mentioned the Japanese fishing ship. It doesn't sound like they were doing that much to try to keep people out of the areas where they were blowing their bombs up.
Yeah, it's like having explosive diarrhea in a quiet classroom. It's not subtle.
No.
And that's what we have for Castle Bravo. That was number 6.
And here is Bikini, nearly 4,000 miles from the United States, a tiny coral atoll destined for atomic bomb experiments. Here, a long way from the heavily populated areas of the world, the Army and Navy will put the atom bomb through a laboratory test. Here, a whole fleet of iron ships will undergo the attack, observed by scores of military men and men of science. In front of the palm-thatched community house, an American naval officer, through an interpreter, discusses plans for moving the people. The Navy is transporting the entire population to Rongerik Atoll and paying a fair price for property that can't be taken along.
All right, now, James, will you tell them that the United States government now wants to attempt to turn this great destructive force into something good for mankind, and that these experiments here at Bikini are the first step in that direction? Now then, James, they have heard our plan. Will you ask King Judah now to get up and to speak here for his people?
We will glad to go, and everything good, and everything in God's hands.
Tell him that's fine. Everything being in God's hands, it must be good.
The fallout was to the east and relatively heavy for several hundred miles. There were 3 main points of interest. Rongelap, 110 miles distant, with 82 natives. Rongerik, 150 miles, with no native population but 20 weather personnel. Uterik, 280 miles, with 154 natives. At Rongelap, evacuation was accomplished at H+51 hours. Many of the natives were sick with symptoms not unlike those associated with radiation sickness. All of those exposed were taken to Kwajalein, where complete physical examinations were carried out. With each evacuation team sent in was a representative of the Trust Territory. Every effort was made to assure the comfort and well-being of the natives. Radiation survey teams will be flown back to the atolls, at which time soil and water samples will be taken. Data obtained from evaluation of these samples will be very valuable in the Gabriel studies.
Between 1946 and 1958, the United States detonated 67 nuclear bombs in the Marshall Islands' northern atolls of Bikini and Eniwetok. Abandoned and crumbling concrete bunkers and twisted rebar snake through the coral beds. And at the bottom of Bikini's lagoon, where the U.S. detonated the largest hydrothermal bomb it ever detonated, the Castle Bravo bomb, that's where a group of researchers from Columbia University have been studying the radiation left behind by Castle Bravo and the other bombs. A team of professional divers took core samples from the bottom of Castle Bravo, at some point over 180 feet deep.
So what are you reading?
3.6.
The research team went around different islands in the northern atolls to test the background radiation using Geiger counters. In June, the researchers revealed that part of Rongelap Atoll, one of 27 atolls in the Marshall Islands, is as irradiated as some of the most notorious nuclear waste sites on the planet, including Chernobyl and Fukushima.
Okay, we're gonna do a cheat code for these because I said that the Soviet Union was very protective. They got even more protective over the years of continued tests. So number 5, number 4, number 3, and number 2 are all secret Soviet tests. So these are Soviet tests 173, 174, 147, and 219. So 4 more bomb tests for the next 4 places on the list. All secret, all recorded. The biggest test was Soviet test number 219. Everything within 50 kilometers of that bomb burned. Every tree within 50 kilometers had its branches lit on fire. Also, every tree within 20 kilometers was ripped out of the ground and flattened. We again don't know much besides its yield size. The Soviets did detonate nukes in Kazakhstan. They also detonated nukes all over the goddamn place. Like, the Russians, I mean, not to discount the Americans and every other country out there, but the Russians were hot on testing nukes. Like, they ramped it up quickly. Like, they tested 10 nukes one year, and then the next year they tested 20, and then 30, and then 40, 50, 60, 70 nukes a year. And they detonated them all over their territory and the territory of their allies. The ones on my top 10 list from Russia are almost all detonated in the far north, in the Arctic of Russia, right in the homelands of a bunch of indigenous people, because Russia's as cruel as Canada is, I think. So those were all the secret Soviet tests that we pretty much only know the yield of because they were very private. But the number 1 on the list, the Tsar Bomba, it wasn't a weapon that was designed to be actually used in warfare. It was so big and so heavy that you needed a slow-ass giant plane to carry it and drop it. And theoretically, if you were to set this plane out to drop it on a major city, it would be intercepted before it would get there. But Russia wasn't trying to make a bomb that was plausibly useful in warfare. They were trying to send a message. Hey world, this is what we're capable of.
The United Nations meets in anger and shock on the morning the Russians detonated their super bomb. Ambassador Adlai Stevenson sums up the feelings of 78 nations.
As he said he would, Mr. Khrushchev has exploded his giant bomb in cynical disregard of the United Nations. By this act, the Soviet Union have added injury to insult. They broke the moratorium on nuclear weapons testing. They have raised atmospheric pollution to new heights. They have started a new race for more deadly weapons. They have spurned the humanitarian appeal of the United Nations and of all peace-loving peoples. They have advanced no solid justification for exploding this monstrous and unnecessary weapon. They have been wholly unmoved by the dangers of radioactive fallout to the human race. The United States delegation deeply deplores this contempt for world opinion. And we think that in the light of this somber development, other delegations may wish to express their views on this shocking and distressing news. For today, Mr. Chairman, the world has taken a great leap backward toward anarchy and disaster. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This is the terror that once again casts its eerie shadow over the face of the Earth. The hydrogen bomb. The bomb that Khrushchev announces will once again undergo tests by the Russians. As nuclear test ban talks reconvened in Geneva, the Soviets said that they would resume testing and hinted at a new, even more horrible weapon.
So, say that slow plane with the big bomb was intercepted. If it's shot down, would that potentially trigger the bomb? Or would a certain series of events have to happen in order for that to go off?
It would have to have a certain series of events. Like, in order to detonate this thing, you needed to irradiate the first stage with a huge amount of X-rays and different detonators. And this is the bomb I was talking about earlier, where you need to flip a switch and set up the bomb in its first stage. The first stage is a whole bunch of X-rays hits the first core of material, causing it to fuse and explode. Then it detonates a second, which causes that second to fuse and explode. That then detonates a third that fuses and detonates. And those are just the confirmed layers. So I don't think crashing the plane would be enough to set the bomb off. But if the crew on the inside armed that thing on the way down, it could still explode, hopefully far enough out in the ocean or away from a populated area not to do much damage.
Pull an Iron Man and fly it up through the hole in the universe or whatever it was he did.
Oh yeah, fuck over the bug aliens. It's been a long time since the first movie. There's been a lot of them since then.
Yeah, there has.
Man, I hope King the Conqueror pays off, because I want to feel the magic of Infinity War again. Okay, fanboying over. Now back to bombs. So the Tsar Bomba dropped in 1961, codenamed Ivan. It is still, to this day, the most powerful weapon ever detonated by humanity. It was dropped by a parachute from a Tu-95V aircraft at 40,000 feet. Why did it need a parachute? Well, in the time that it would take for the bomb to drop via gravity, that plane would not have time to escape the fireball, so it needed a parachute to slowly loft it to the ground so the plane would have time to escape the detonation area. There was a secret US spy plane that was monitoring from a great distance, and it thought it was giving itself plenty of room. It had no idea the explosion was going to be that big. That spy plane had its anti-radiation paint scorched off.
Damn.
Now, they survived, but yeah. This bomb was 38 times bigger than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. It sat at 50 megatons. 50 million tons of TNT. So it weighed in at 27 tons, it was about 7 feet high, and its exact design is not known, but as I said before, it had at least a 3-stage detonation. It was detonated at 11:32 a.m. Moscow time, October 30th, 1961. Happy Halloween Eve.
And this was a Soviet Union bomb?
Yeah, this was a bomb from the Soviet Union. Yeah, they wanted to make a point. All their other explosions were kept very private. They let a lot of the information about this bomb purposely leak so that other countries could be watching and bear witness. The exact center of this bomb, within its first few milliseconds of being fully detonated, reached temperatures of up to 30 million degrees Celsius. The blast was significantly brighter than the sun to everybody within 1,000 miles and was observable for up to 1,500 miles away. It had the power to level buildings up to 160 kilometers away. It caused third-degree burns instantly to any animal or thing within 100 kilometers. The area of devastation where fatalities would be at 100%, the footprint of its total 100% guaranteed death destruction was big enough to enwrap and level any modern city. This is why this bomb was seen as such a message from Russia, because the footprint of destruction it left meant that any modern city on Earth could be reduced to ash if this thing was exploded inside of it. Paris, New York, Los Angeles, Hong Kong, Sydney, any major modern city would be wiped off the map if this bomb was exploded inside of it. But like I said, it's hard to get this bomb to the place it needs to be because it's big and heavy. It needs a big, strong, slow plane to carry it, so it would probably be intercepted, but that's the biggest explosion in history.
But the jubilation was short-lived. Some of the physicists were deeply shocked by the very power they'd unleashed. Kurchatov himself began to argue for a ban on further tests. In 1958, at the Soviet Assembly, he made an impassioned plea.
Я выступаю на этой сессии от имени советских ученых, в том числе и от ученых, занимающихся вопросами атомной энергии.
Kurchatov implored the scientists of the world not to use nuclear energy as a weapon of destruction. For Sakharov, this was also a turning point. He calculated that for every megaton of explosive, 10,000 people would suffer the fallout. The H-bombs he was designing were 3 times bigger than that.
We had created a terrible weapon, the most terrible weapon in human history.
But over the next few years, his concerns were ignored. In 1961, Khrushchev ordered him to create the biggest bomb he possibly could. On his return to Arzamas 16, Sakharov gathered his team together. On August the 13th, 1961, the Berlin Wall went up, a powerful statement of Cold War intent. But Nikita Khrushchev had one more surprise for the West.
Delegates from 25 lands representing 750 million people, the so-called neutrals, meet in Belgrade. The representatives were aghast when Khrushchev resumed atom bomb testing as they met, and the Arab's Nasser voiced a typical reaction, saying he was shocked at the Russians. The neutrals, of course, play no favorites between East and West. Their importance depends on a Cold War. Yugoslavia's Tito called the meeting and said their purpose is to make the great powers realize that the fate of the world can't rest in their hands alone. And Nehru called for a halt in testing, a move seconded by Nasser. Others attending are Indonesia's Sukarno and Ghana's Nkrumah, both Soviet bent. Just what was behind Khrushchev's thinking in resuming nuclear tests during their summit meeting is a matter for night-long discussions among the delegates. The consensus was that the 4 test explosions set off by the Russians within 6 days did not enhance the position of the Soviets in the eyes of most of the neutrals. At the end of the conference, the delegates could agree on few things, but they did call for East and West to negotiate and said that everyone should aid the underdeveloped world. Nehru and Nkrumah left for Moscow at the end of the conference, while Sukarno is scheduled to arrive in Washington. They hope to prevail on Khrushchev and President Kennedy to hold a summit meeting.
Khrushchev knew he'd never used these super bombs against the Americans. They had no military significance. Sakharov repeatedly begged him to stop the tests. The response was short and brutal.
Khrushchev сказал, что на самом деле существует только одна политика с позиции силы, и я был бы слюнтяй, если бы слушался таких, как Сахаров.
Then in 1962, the Soviet military decided to test 2 similar superbombs. In the desolate wastes of the Arctic, preparations were underway. The giant bomb was assembled in a workshop on top of a platform car. A few days later, the platform was coupled to a train to take the bomb to the airfield. As the generals gathered for the test, Sakharov frantically tried to stop it. He told Khrushchev that exploding a second bomb was not only unnecessary, it would be murder. Hours later, Sakharov discovered the first bomb was already airborne. Afraid he might get the test stopped, the military had speeded up the schedule.
It was the ultimate defeat for me. A terrible crime was about to happen, and I could do nothing to stop it. I was overcome by my impotence, unbearable bitterness, shame, and humiliation. I put my face down on the desk and wept.
Sakharov had been defeated by men who'd grown more powerful thanks to the weapon he had created. It was a demonstration of force, a card in the superpower game of mutual intimidation.
Although we say the Cold War is over, there are 10 countries, maybe 11, that have nuclear weapons at the ready today in 2023. Russia has about 6,000. United States of America has about 5,500. China has about 350. France has about 290. The United Kingdom has about 225. Pakistan has about 165. India has 150. Israel has 90. And North Korea, it hasn't managed to build an actual operating nuclear warhead or an actual operating missile, but it has enough material to build about 40 to 50 nuclear warheads itself if it ever gets there. The average size of modern nukes are small, comparatively, about 500 kilotons, but that's still around 25 times bigger than the first nuke fired at Trinity. And around the globe, we have about 10 billion tons of TNT's worth of nuclear weapons waiting to be fired. That's about 200 Tsar Bombas sitting in missile silos waiting to be fired. It's literally enough power to level every major city on Earth and reduce the population by 80% within a few hours if all of them are fired. I am afraid. Does anybody have anything else to say?
I remember learning about, like, recently, you're talking about the stocks that everyone has of nuclear warheads. I remember reading that a lot of what Russia has might be in disrepair, just from lack of attention and lack of funds, in trying to become ready for any potential threat. Posturing during the current war, it's kind of become obvious that they're not as capable as they pretend to be.
The next commander-in-chief is going to inherit a major nuclear national security nightmare, crumbling nuclear weapons plants, some facilities dating back to the Manhattan Project.
Because it's more difficult today to bring new facilities online, we must continue to operate existing facilities longer than we had anticipated when they were originally built.
70-plus years later, they're still in operation. Photos released by Congress show a leaking ceiling, crumbling concrete, and rotted floors at some of the nation's most critical nuclear sites. In Oak Ridge, Tennessee, at the Y-12 uranium facility, officials acknowledge there is crumbling concrete and poorly maintained facilities. At the Pantex Nuclear Weapons Assembly Plant in Amarillo, Texas, rotting ceilings and walls. And at the Los Alamos Nuclear Weapons Design Laboratory in New Mexico, tarps are catching water from a leaking roof.
Los Alamos today, we have trailers that were put into service 30 years ago. And in some of those trailers, we have problems with ceilings, water damage falling in. We have problems with rodents in them.
More money may not even be the answer. What officials are saying is that some of these facilities are so old, so crumbling, it is almost impossible to properly maintain them at this point.
There's a lot of funny business about that, not only in Russia, but all around the world. Like, even the nuclear warheads in the United States of America, a lot of them are still operating under, floppy disk level technology. And a lot of countries are saying they are, quote unquote, decommissioning nuclear silos, when in reality, it's just silos that have fallen into disrepair and it would cost too much to repair them. So they're saying they're denuclearizing. So, you're right. The amount of warheads that are actually in working order and ready to go is unknown, because everybody who's a nuclear power is going to posture that all their warheads are ready to go when we don't really know the number that are operational.
the same time, earlier, one of you mentioned Russia saying that there was about 100 suitcase nukes missing, and when you said that, part of me kind of wondered, are they missing, or is Russia pretending they don't know where they are, so when one of them gets used, Russia can be like, "What? No, it wasn't us."
Oh, there's a lot of that as well, and like that's if these suitcases exist at all. It could be just a scare tactic. Maybe they're trying to put the message out there that they had mass production of these suitcase bombs and 100 of them are lost, and that sort of gives them the freedom to both do what you said, which is, oh, an explosion happened, wasn't us, must have been one of the stolen ones, and use one of these suitcases if they have them. There's a bunch of mixed message and propaganda, and like the real truth is sort of unknown. It's a bunch of propaganda and posturing, and the truth is somewhere in the middle, but who knows where.
Yeah.
Sounds like the truth is nobody knows, including Russia themselves, and
Like, I don't want to be condescending to the entire human race here, but like, our capacity to kill has become so much greater in such a short amount of time. Turn of the century, late 1800s, we just started getting Gatling guns on a high degree. Like, Gatling guns can kill, a couple hundred people an hour if you know how to fire them right and provide them cooldown time and all that. A couple hundred people an hour from a Gatling gun. Now you have one point of contact, one bomb that can end the lives of millions in an instant. Have we matured as a race all that much to handle this increased level of responsibility of this much more killing power within our fingers? I don't think we have.
There's a great quote from the movie Princess Mononoke. I'm trying to look it up now, that I always think of when people talk about building bigger and deadlier weapons. But I mean, that entire movie, the whole point of it is kind of, I mean, it's mostly environmental, but part of it is just about destroying the world in the sake of progress, people hurting each other, when really what is it all for?
Yeah, I wonder if the nuclear age is going to be one big Chekhov's gun where, it's going to be a hell of a climax at the end. I also heard a quote about nukes. They're a lot like lawyers. You don't want to be the only guy that doesn't have them, but whenever you use them, they make a mess. Every sci-fi future where it says that, oh yeah, well, humanity bombed the shit out of their original planets. They had to move to like the moon of Neptune. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. That tracks.
So, if you're interested in catching more of myself, Misfit, you can find me and my wife on our podcast that we actually run together. It's called the Kind of Fruity Podcast. You can find us on kindofruity.podbean.com or just about wherever you get your podcast, or youtube.com/@kindofruity. We basically talk about a little bit of stuff that's going on in the news and just have little conversations here and there. Last week, at the time of recording this, we actually had Pepper Coyote on as a guest to talk about socialism. Otherwise, you can find more of her on her Twitch channel, twitch.tv/BrennaMSM.
Alrighty, thank you for tuning in to our top 10 list. I'm gonna try and put something happy-go-lucky or one of those 50s anti-radiation cartoons. I'll decide when I edit the episode to play you out. But for now, I've been Ood Gallifrey, guest hosting this episode I had with me.
I'm Misfit.
And guest this episode.
Brannigan.
And ISIS.
Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time for some more interesting bullshit. Ta-ta.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
An atom bomb destroys or injures in three ways: by blast, heat, and radioactivity. The blast of an atom bomb is its most important destructive agent. In Japan, whole buildings were flattened by its force. However, many buildings of sturdy construction, even though close to the explosion, remained standing. The principal dangers of blast are flying glass and debris, the fires it may start, and the danger of being crushed in collapsing buildings. The atom bomb destroys by heat. People caught in the open as far as 2 miles away suffered flash burns. Yet,
protection could have been easily achieved. Here, a bridge post and rail shielded the surface behind it. Any solid material afforded similar protection. The third weapon of the bomb is radioactivity, thrown off at the instant of explosion. However, the majority of people exposed to radiation recovered completely, including a large percentage of those who suffered serious radiation sickness. Today, they lead normal lives. They bear children. Their children are normal. These, then, are the weapons of the atom bomb that we must protect against: blast, heat, and radioactivity. Our cities are prime targets for atomic attack, but mass evacuation would be disastrous. An enemy would like nothing better than to have us leave our cities empty and unproductive. If an emergency should come, our factories will be battle stations. Production must go on if we are to win. Our offices and homes will also be posts of duty, not to be deserted. With the knowledge of the first atomic explosions to guide us, our chances for survival will be far better than those of the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, if we act on our knowledge and are prepared. The first job is to look over your own home for shelter possibilities. If you live in a private home that is well built, the cellar is the safest place to be. The lower you get, the more barriers there are likely to be against blast, heat, and radioactivity. If you are at home when a surprise attack occurs, crawl beneath a table if it is very near, or drop to the floor with your back to the window. The immediate danger is over in about a minute, unless the explosion occurred near the ground or water. In this case, radioactive materials are trapped in the particles of dirt or water thrown up by the explosion. When these particles fall back to Earth, they may be dangerous. So get indoors immediately after a ground-level explosion. Cover broken windows against radioactive dust with blankets or cardboard. Civil defense radiological teams, equipped with radiation survey meters, will check on contamination in any bombed area. Stay under cover until you hear officially that it is safe outside. If you have been exposed to radioactive dust, wash the exposed areas. Pay particular attention to your hair. Get all the dirt from under your fingernails. So act now. Someday your life may depend on it.
An update to Case 141, Cryonics. Just what happened to some of the first people to undergo cryonics. And for those of you who don't know, this is, I'm going to say this, the pseudoscience, because it's not proven, that we can take somebody after they died and freeze them solid, and then people of the future will be able to revive them and undead them. It's a great episode, listen to that, but just what happened to some of the first people that underwent this? Basically lots of mistreatment of corpses. There was a case where a man drove around in a truck with somebody's mother in the back, covered in dry ice, but was in the back of the truck for far too long, like according to the contract that he wrote up. She was supposed to be in the tube and frozen solid at a certain time after she died, but she was in the back of the truck way after that contract. There's examples of, for a loss of space or a loss of materials, or only wanting to cool down one tube at a time, instead of keeping tubes personalized, which is what people signed up for when they signed up for these, they would stuff 4 people in a 1-person tube. Sometimes it got even worse. Sometimes these companies would go bankrupt and the power would be shut off and people would just be allowed to rot inside of these capsules. And then they would be scraped out of the bottom of the capsules when they were discovered. So yeah, that's what happened to some of the first people that got into cryonics. There's still some people that are still frozen solid by still operating companies, but I don't know, they could either go bankrupt and the same thing happens to them. The company could be taken over by corrupt people, or the people that own it now could become corrupt and allow mistreatment of the bodies. capitalism could strain forward and they're forced to downsize in horrific and immoral ways with people's bodies in order to adjust. Or they could, just undergo a power outage and the bodies are ruined. Or just in the future, they are unable to revive the deadness and repair the damage that being frozen has done. Because it's an assumption that the future is going to solve that. So yeah, a lot of problems to solve to make this a real thing, but I think it's still sci-fi for now. A nice dream. I don't think it's going to pan out for the people that signed up for it, though. At least not for most of them. Well, that's the end of our little nuclear series. See you next week for some non-nuclear interesting bullshit. Ta-ta, and hope your 2023 is going well.